Well, good morning. I'm Grant Saviers, and with me here is Gardner Hendrie to do the oral history of Julius Marcus, otherwise known as Mark Marcus. Mark's been in the computer industry for many, many years, and we think we'll start with tell us about your early years, growing up, where you grew up, how things influenced you, people that made an impression on your early life.
Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up in primarily Toledo, Ohio, and as a kid, I was always interested in things, electronics, motorbikes, rebuilding them, mostly things as opposed to people. My father was a doctor. He worked too hard, I thought, although in later years I found I worked as much as he did. I would help him make small operations, in his office, because we lived in his office. And I decided I didn't want to be a doctor. In high school, I was kind of a hellion in grade school, thrown out of a couple places. But in high school, I got more seriously interested in learning. I enjoyed learning. Went to, I thought, a great high school at the time. Toledo was really a nice place. It was during the heyday of the automotive industry. We were on the wrong side of the tracks, kind of the poorest high school in town, but it had great teachers, people interested in you as a person. And I took a liking to the technical sides of things, although I also enjoyed things like English and so forth. Had a nice bunch of friends, some of the better students in the school, and we sort of fed on each other. And it was all in all a very a good experience. Met my wife at that point in time, got seriously involved with her by the senior year in high school, which I wouldn't advise anymore, but that's what happened back then in those days. And that influenced where I went to school. I think I had a choice of either MIT or Case, and chose Case because it was only 100 miles away, whereas MIT was, a million miles away to me.
Were there any teachers in the high school that really had a significant influence on where you were headed?
Well, not specifically. None of them pointed at engineering or pointed at Case or anything of that nature, but they were very They were very interested in students as such. There was a chemistry teacher, and that's why I started at Case in chemistry. But even the English teacher that the school had, the little wrinkled up old lady, was a wonderful, wonderful person. Introduced us to enjoying the business of writing and reading and so forth. I took mechanical drafting in high school. They don't teach that anymore. And all of those things kind of moved me along toward, generally speaking, what I thought was going to be a technical career.
Interesting. So now you said were you married at the end of high school, or was that later in college?
I got married as a junior it was really a senior, I guess. We finally got married in a senior year in college, and then I went on to get a master's degree, so we were married during that period of time too.
Right. So you end up at Case Tech at the time, right? That was
Case Tech, yeah.
And that's in Cleveland. And tell us a little bit about getting started, making the transition from high school to university.
I was scared to death there at Case. I never ran into students quite at that caliber, and school was just an absolute committed focus to me initially. I determined I didn't like chemistry. Well, actually, I got into organic chemistry, and that kind of washed me out of chemistry as more than anything else. I found I like the mechanical side of things. I like stuff, things you can see. Never a terrific mathematician, and somehow electrical engineering wasn't on the horizon for me then. As a result of the interest in the mechanical side of things, that sort of led to an interest in the computers that were in the back of the campus. And I got spent some time with those computers. And I also ran into a professor who drove a nice car, actually. Don Ekman drove a Mercedes SL Gullwing Coupe. And he used to work on that car, and I'd go over to his home and help him screw around with the car. The car was aluminum, and it would corrode, and there were things to deal with it and so forth. He also had a Triumph, a TR3, and he raced the TR3. And I got interested in that. Then I got interested in him, and from that got interested in control systems because he was a big deal in control systems at the time, and that involved computers. And as a result of that, moved into computer control systems, systems analysis, and so forth.
So there was a computing capability at Case at the time you were there. Do you remember what that was?
They had a UNIVAC 1, I think it was, and an IBM, early IBM, I forgot the number. I do remember it only had about 2,000K drum machine of sorts. Ultimately, they had a Burroughs 5,000, I think it was, in the back. Of
so it might have been an IBM 650. I think
I think it was.
The only drum machine.
It was an IBM 650.
Was it a 650?
Right.
Yeah. You know, you went there, so
Right.
you know.
and it was a Burroughs 220.
220.
Yeah, it was the last tube machine ever shipped. And of course, there's something famous about that IBM 650. One of your classmates was Don Knuth.
Oh yeah. I went. That was both exciting and discouraging. I went to school with Don Knuth, who again was so impressive as a person and a technologist, but balanced person and technologist. And I also went to school with a guy by the name of Roger Brockett, who turns out to be one of the world's best mathematicians at this moment. And they both gave me a serious inferiority complex. And Knuth would do some interesting things with the machine, found wiring errors in the machine. Actually, I think did some work, paid work for both Burroughs and IBM, both at that time and maybe when he ended up in Stanford. But there was really leading edge computer stuff with some really outstanding people at Case. Very, very impressive place. And it was just dumb luck that I ended up there, I think. MIT would have been fine too, I think. But at the time, Case was really doing excellent things in the area of control systems and computers.
So a little bit more about getting a degree in control engineering, and I guess you went on for a master's degree also, right?
Yeah, I got along the way, did reasonably well in school, and I picked up a few scholarships. I picked up a National Defense Fellowship, which was a 3-year program for a PhD from the government, and I took that program. I could earn a little money as a teaching fellow along the way, and it paid for everything, and it was in a field that was interesting to me. And along the way, I ran into one of my big nemesises, which is serious mathematics. I don't get along with things that are ethereal and anything more than 3 dimensions, and I have serious problems with them. I've got to stay in the real world. I characterize myself as a Newtonian kind of guy. This relativity doesn't work for me. I stopped with the master's degree, and also was not interested in teaching, which seemed to be where I was headed. You could say I flunked out with the master's degree, as opposed to the PhD. I never quite finished that program.
And any interesting summer jobs or experiences along the way of getting your hands dirty again?
Yeah, actually, the summer jobs, I would say to anybody in the technical side of the world that the summer jobs are probably as important to you as the formal education. I mean, what do you call the programs that involve both work assignments and
either fellowships or internships.
Internship of sorts. Some schools offer 5-year programs with internships and so forth. Well, this was a 4-year program, but the summers were very important. And they taught me a lot about, first they broaden your points of view. They give you an indication of what you might like or dislike about a future course of action. They make a little money for you, but there's a great teaching level involved with the summer programs. What sticks in my mind?
Anything you blew up or any great stories about experiences that were dramatic?
Blew up. Well, I worked in a glass bottle development factory where I had to stand. I learned to deal with large amounts of glass, vats of glass that you stood over the top of and had to change parts in the molten glass. And the factory was so hot you couldn't put a tool down and pick it up with your hands. You had to have gloves on. If you got the gloves wet, you got burned with steam from the temperature of everything around you. I learned I didn't like that. And I learned a little something about handling molten glass, and that I didn't see that going anywhere, so I didn't do that. And I worked for a company that made annealing furnaces. They treated metal for, you know about this, right? The carbonizing and heat treating of metal itself, and they wanted a technique developed for heating large slabs in a rolling mill, and this involved 3 million BTU per hour kind of burners and so forth. And I designed a burner which really looks like a jet engine when you get done with it because of the staged combustion and so forth. They used a rocket nozzle and developed a impinging form of heating and pumping system itself. And yeah, it was interesting things like that. But they did teach me to, it just broadened the points of view, and that turned out to be valuable. It gave you real life experiences working with stuff, real life experiences working with other technically oriented people. It's just as important to me, I think, for a student in the technologies to do that. It's a shame. You can go, fling hash someplace and maybe get paid some money for it, but you don't learn as much.
Yeah.
So
as an industrial environment.
The industrial environment is very, very important.
So you graduated with the master's degree when?
In 1962.
1962, okay.
100 years ago.
And kind of what was the strategy for getting employed?
Well, I had worked, I've never been a very adventuresome person, I don't think. I was working at Harris Intertype in the summer. Harris Intertype made large printing presses primarily at that time. And they made large printing presses. I worked there in their laboratories. They were nice folks. I enjoyed working with them. They had some technology. I just went to work for them. And I did analysis and instrumentation of large vibrating bodies and presses. In this particular case, I built some analog computers. I used some capacitance measuring techniques to measure very small motions and relative motions between rotating equipment. And I was getting to know a lot about the printing process itself, the dynamics between the printing surfaces, the characteristics of bearings. I made hydraulic bearings instead of ball bearings and things of that nature. And that was all very, very good. I mean, enjoyed the people, enjoyed the activity, but I got concerned that in the long run, I really didn't know where a knowledge of printing was going to get to, and I got itchy feet. And a friend of mine who I went to school with suggested that I join GE Process Control, which was back in the heartland of digital computer control again. And I did so. And to this day, I think of him as having helped me make one of the most important decisions of my life. Because at GE Process Control, they taught you these computers from the ones and zeros and bits upward because that's the basis for control interfaces for devices, of course, and real-time systems. I mean, I understood the inner workings and guts of a real-time operating system, and you dealt with both the hardware and the software because, the I/O drivers and the interfaces to the real world were an important aspect of the hardware itself. And I was anyway, that was very, very useful to me. I understood computers really from a basic standpoint and also from an application standpoint. And it was real-time stuff. It wasn't data processing.
Where was GE?
GE was in Phoenix. There were two operations in Phoenix. One was the data processing division, and this was a separate division in the industrial side of GE and GE Process Control. And I worked really in the field. I worked in Cleveland and in Philadelphia as an applications engineer. That involved, again, another piece of talking to customers, like solving their problems. And then I supported the salespeople. I ended up in many cases being almost the salesman on the account, helping to develop customer solutions. And then I would engineer their solutions, write the specs on the product, send it back to the home office, get the product built, and then get it installed. So it gave me a full spectrum. Also, what you learn was working at a distance with no real control over the development organization was an interesting problem. You had to learn to cajole and convey your needs, get them to fix the scheduling problems as well as the engineering problems that they had. That turned out to be, again, very valuable thing to learn, and something I had to learn on the job.
So were you able to use your control systems engineering knowledge in solving some customer problems and building a computer in the loop for the customer? Any examples of that?
Basically what you did with those machines was, instead of programming the actual process aspects, it was like three-mode controllers, proportional, integral, and derivative types of controllers, measured process parameters, brought the process parameters in, provided them to the then customer-built applications, which then output the control targets and set points to the digital implementations that we did, which involved taking the measurements from the sensors in the system and then pushing the various valves and controls.
It was fundamentally you acquired data and then did set point control.
That's right.
Yeah, as opposed to direct closed loop.
Well, the closed loop was there as part of these controllers.
You didn't replace the set point controllers.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, we would actually replace the set controllers. We had hold of the valves, we had hold of the measurement devices. What we didn't do is the applications analysis of how you set the set point. For example, I put a system in the Bayway oil refinery. It ran the whole oil refinery. I don't know anything about controlling an oil refinery. They told me what they needed to measure. They told me the valves they wanted to control. I put the system together, the annunciators, the control panels for the operators, things like that. They built the algorithms to control the oil refinery.
Oh, good.
They knew how to control the cat crackers and so forth. I did something you would like, Grant, since you like automobiles. I automated a system to make the slurry for spark plug insulators, which is very much like making freeze-dried coffee, where you throw the mixture of water and so forth in the top of the vat, and you pump air through the thing as it falls down through, and it then gives you certain particle sizes and derives the stuff out of the water mixture at the bottom. Well, that's the way you make spark plug insulating material. So a wide variety of things that you got involved with.
And these are the General Electric 200 series of computers, is that?
Weren't they a separate process? Were they still using a separate process controlled series like the 312 and the 412? Or those have gone away by then?
You know, I don't remember the numbers for
okay.
sure. They were dedicated real-time computers. They built them. They were 24-bit machines, but they were built specifically for that purpose, with a lot of emphasis on being able to take sensor inputs from the outside and put both analog and digital signals out. And I don't remember. You give me a little bit of time, I could tell you. I don't remember what the number of the computers themselves were. But I knew how to program those machines at the console, you know, from the keys, as well as, you know, do the parametric things. You know, it was a computer application, I think, as involved as you could get with it if you weren't actually building the computer itself.
Right down in the guts.
It was in the guts.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, you were in the field, and General Electric's back in Phoenix. And how did that career progress?
It was doing all right. You know, I was asked to go down to Phoenix. I got a promotion, and they wanted me to do their strategic planning. Strategy's always been an area of interest to me, and I don't know, somehow they thought I could do that. And I was ready to go down there. I went down, actually picked out a home to buy, and then I ran into one of the GE group executives. And I listened to him give us talk. He handled a number of different industrial divisions. And frankly, I really got concerned. This guy was off the wall, didn't have any grasp of products, markets. I don't know what kind of businessman he was or was not, but he sort of scared me. And I decided that if he was going to run that place, I couldn't work there. I mean, it was really a judgment I made on the character of this person. Now, he subsequently was fired, and that business actually disappeared. That was, you know, could I see all that? No, but I got uncomfortable with the leadership. And this was a commitment to go down to Phoenix, and I got nervous about that. So I applied for jobs in the computer industry, and I wrote 5 letters to places like Control Data and SEL and so forth. And digital was the only return I got out of those letters I wrote. Who the hell was Digital Equipment Corporation?
So this is, when, 1968, 69 time frame?
Yeah, in that sort of time frame, right. And so I got, you know, I went in, took the interview, this dirty old mill. You know, it was certainly different than what I expected. And it sounded interesting to me. They made a job offer to me. And I got a little bit concerned about whether I had to join Digital Equipment Corporation. They wanted me to do some marketing promotion for them at the time with these things called mini computers, and I wasn't sure what that was for sure. And I actually refused the job. And then over the weekend, I said, "This is crazy. I don't want to go to Phoenix. I'm going to go to this unknown company in the dirty old mill." And I did. You know, and that was just another terrific decision. A bit of an aside. One of the kids asked me about, grandchildren asked me about, you know, how you make some of these decisions in life, and I sat back and I tried to think about the role that luck played in my life. You'd like to think you're in control of everything that happens to you. I did it my way. And when I did that analysis, I got really concerned with the level that luck played in my life. It was hugely, hugely important. I mean, digital at that time was just one of another little companies fighting it out in the you know, mini computer wars. which I didn't really understand. That was a different world. They weren't used very heavily at that point in time in process control, and they were used in the laboratory, but you didn't see them in the process environment, so I didn't know them. But that decision, entered that company. They asked me to do this work in the area of the PDP-11, which turned out to be a very important machine.
Sure. Let's back up a bit. And so you make the decision to go there. Was there among the people that you met and said, well, these are the people I want to work with, or any sense of what the company was like other than these guys are doing something strange in a dirty mill?
I didn't talk to any engineers in that process. I talked to Nick Mazaris, who was the group exec, the guy responsible for the PDP-8 and the PDP-11. And I talked to the HR department. It was Mark Abbott. And they were really nice guys. I mean, Mazaris seemed real. He was positive on the opportunity itself. And I think I was attracted to the personality. Now, of course, Mazaris left 2 months after I got there. That was a little unusual. And he probably was planning on leaving when I was talking to him, but I didn't know it at the time. But yeah, Nick was attractive to me, and always was. He's a good, level-headed guy. But I didn't talk to any engineering personnel. I had no idea what a PDP-11 was. I never saw one, and I wasn't real sure what I was going to do when I took the job. But so that was just lucky.
Mm-hmm. So the Get Started job was, tell us more about that.
Well, I was asked to write brochures and promotional issues, and within a month somebody decided, I think it was Mazaris, I'm not sure, decided I ought to be the marketing manager for the PDP-11. What's that? What do they do? How do you find your way around inside the morass of the company itself? Then we had to introduce the PDP-11, and that
jump in the deep end of the pool.
It was the deep end of the pool, and that was the story of. Yeah, it was the deep end of the pool. It was, and it was a lot of really good competition around. I didn't know really much about how you compete in that environment, so I had to. It was just a lot of hard work.
Well, the gentleman over here on my right, Gardner, was at Data General.
Oh, I read Gardner's backup, and he's really a good competitor. I mean, he knew machines from the inside out because that's what he did. Yeah, so you had to distinguish the computer in some way in the marketplace. And it turns out that this particular architecture for that machine, this unibus architecture, which had this common bus across the back of it, and then the instruction set was kind of unique in the PDP-11, two-word structure, and so we pushed the architecture at the time because the marketplace was technical buyers. They knew more about the computers they were buying than we did selling them. And therefore they taught you a lot. And that's always a good thing. You need, I think, in selling technical products, you need a smart buyer. And the smart buyer will teach you a lot about your product. And I learned a lot from the customers about why my computer was a good product, and then fed on it, and then fed it back into both my company for development purposes and fed it out in the marketplace to sell the product.
So after 2 months, you end up with your boss leaving, the guy that hired you.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Well, I got a new boss. And that new boss was an interesting piece of work. It was Andy Knowles. Andy Knowles had been kicking around in RCA in the memory business. And Andy was quite a different guy than Mazaris. Andy Knowles was. He had this ability to make decisions about what the market was going to, how big the business was going to be, and what kind of money we were going to make in it. And I watched him doing that process and had no idea how he was doing it. I mean, he seemed to be able to sit down and suck this stuff out of his thumb. And with great decisiveness. And I was just impressed with that. The other thing is he did his own, there weren't any spreadsheets, and he did his own business plans, you know, and then I learned from that how you did a business plan. And, you know, I learned to do a detailed business plan and crank out the whole damn thing, all the numbers myself, which I'll go back, just step back a little. At Case, there was one 3-hour course on finance for the non-financial manager. Turned out to be one of the most valuable things, again, I ever saw in my life. It taught me to read, you know, operating statements and balance sheets, and it was, again, hugely valuable because in addition to getting some sense for computers out of all that previous experience, numbers spoke to me. If somebody gave me a sheet of paper in which there was a business plan, I could read a lot into the numbers of the business plan. And but Andy sort of taught me some of that stuff. And Andy was a good manager. He was tough, but he let me have a lot of leeway. But so I worked for Andy Knowles for the period of time that he was there. And we pushed the PDP-11, and PDP-11 turned out to be very successful, both within the company, viewed as an interloper initially by the rest of the company that existed. I think that that's often another characteristic in business. Somebody shows up with this new thing, and everybody else poo-poos it. Why are you doing that? It's going to fail. This other thing is better. And you have the internal struggles, you know, architectural struggles or some technology or, you know, standard issue differences, you know, across the company. And we pushed on the PDP-11 against a lot of internal issues as well as external.
So this was actually the launch of the PDP-1120. That was the first machine in the 11 series.
Yes.
And Data General was out there ahead with the 16-bit machine.
It made a good product.
And so the 11 line starts to expand, I think. There was smaller ones and bigger ones. How were you involved with that?
Well, I said I learned a lot from customers, and then I coined an expression which actually turns a lot of people off, but I try to get people to understand what I'm thinking and to not forget things. So I coined an expression called warm armpit marketing, which was you get close to the customer, you know, and you learn what he needs, and you listen very closely to what the customer needs, and he'll tell you what the next products are supposed to be, and then you marry that with what technology will allow you to do to meet the needs of that customer. And customers wanted bigger PDP-11s. They started to build much bigger systems than we ever expected them to build. A lot more peripherals, more memory, and they overloaded the bus and the structure. The bus drivers and the machine couldn't handle what we started to put together, and we were getting these failures and difficulties. I always kind of hesitate to mention this in a way, but we took a big ECO. I don't know what there were, 11 boards or something in this PDP-11 to begin with, and 5 or 7 of them had to be replaced because of the bus drivers and the structures. Yeah, it was you just couldn't handle this thing, you know, and so you had to increase the power to drive the bus. So it required a major ECO to the computers that were installed for the people who were using the larger systems, and then you wanted to sell the bigger systems. This was going to really screw up my financing. I mean, this was a bad ECO. You were literally replacing the machine. Yeah. So I said, well, let's call it an option, a large machine option. And I sold that as a benefit instead of a fix. Now, what I did is I pulled the margins way down on that to nothing. I sold it at cost because I felt a little bad, you know. So we, on that particular machine anyhow, that was a problem, the 1120. So we sold it as a large machine option, as an option when you went over a certain number of loads and so forth on the machine, you went to this thing. And then we put them in the newer machines when they went out, and we overcame that difficulty. But there was an example of, wow, it did too well and run into some other limitations down the road. But the machine was very well accepted by the technologically knowledgeable customer. And they started making demands for expansion of the applications, particularly in the area of communications. So they wanted a lot of multi-bus capability, serial bus switching capability. So we built what the customer asked for again. And then the people who got interested in that application were the what I call the spook agencies, the black and CIA, NSA, DIA, and so forth. Very smart people. They decided what they wanted. I think they called the salesman called me, and I said, "Oh, there's the marketplace." You know? It wasn't anything I dug out of any place. It was, again, listening to the customers.
So if you back up a bit, you know, you're there in the marketing organization, and there's a bunch of engineering people and software. How about software? What was the early software about, and how did you kind of influence that and move its direction around?
Well, they told me what was available. You know, they said, here's this RT11, here's real-time operating system for the PDP-11. And now I identified with that because that's what I knew, right, from previous experience. So I understood how that worked. I understand how it worked with the machines, the registers, the interrupts, and that issue. What I had learned at GE taught me how you use the real-time operating system in conjunction with the computer, which then helped the marketing, which then helped me solve customer problems and so forth. So that was the structure, the basic structure of the machine. You know, it's a step above DOS, you know, the real-time capabilities.
A big step above DOS.
Big step above DOS. It was a real operating system. You know, and it was real-time and not batch. Able to handle interrupts and so forth, and that made it useful for data communications applications.
Mm-hmm. So was the data communication, you get started into data communications because of customers are pulling you that direction. Kind of what were they asking for, and how did you respond?
They just wanted serial line capability. They wanted asynchronous and synchronous communications capabilities, and we built a variety of peripheral equipment that would go on the Unibus. And again, just listening to the customer.
Now, was this your engineering department, or was this somewhere else in the company, or?
The central processors and the operating systems were built by, quote, central engineering. Yes, I had a small engineering group who built the peripherals, and it was Vince Bastiani in particular. And Vince was one of these unique engineers who not only was a good engineer, he was very helpful in terms of setting priorities for what products you really built, how you spent your dollars in engineering. He had a good sense for what the applications might be, and Vince designed most of the data communications peripherals. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was a small group of engineers, but very, very important. This is an aside, but I learned very quickly that as a marketeer, you didn't dictate what engineers did. You needed an engineer who really did understand the problems that the customer was ultimately going to solve, and also dreamt and thought about the opportunities in a way similar to what you did as the marketing guy. This was true whether the engineer worked quotes for you or you tried to influence them at a distance in some kind of central engineering organization. You needed engineers who dreamt, who loved the work that they did, who had a strong sense for what they were going to do. Again, to emphasize to my people and so forth, I would tell them, you can't shove specs and pizza under the door to an engineer and expect to get good product back. You had to get the engineer out. He had to, again, feel the customer demand. He had to have his own emotional drive, and he was, again, a very sensitive entity. You had to treat him with respect. He had to respect you, and the engineer turned out to be, in the technical world, probably the most important people. The venture capitalists and the financial managers always want to blame the marketeer for a bad move. Well, product is the hardcore of a technical company, and you learn that pretty quickly. And it comes from very delicate people who have to have good dreams about what they want to make.
So you find these spooky new customers. How did that go?
You're talking about the
Defense agencies,
defense agencies, CIA, NSA. Well, they were terrific as customers. They would often fix your problems. You'd ship them a machine, didn't quite do what he wanted. They'd make them do what you wanted. They enhanced operating systems. They built multi-processors, and they stretched the computers and you as a supplier to the limit. They demanded extraordinary reliability out of the products. They demanded delivery in an exact period of time. These were often times when there was more demand than you had ability to deliver. They again taught a lot from, again, a hardcore knowledge of the technology. We had to have special service personnel who were, cleared to enter the facilities. You never got back a machine; they'd destroy them. When you went to visit them as a vendor, they made you leave everything at the door. You walk down the halls and there's red lights flashing. You walked in the conference rooms and there was shades pulled down over the blackboards, and you never really sort of knew what they do. But I learned a little bit about what they did with these computers, and I was very proud of what they were doing. They were, again, one of these committed people. They believed in what they were doing, and they were true practitioners of their art. And that's why I think they were as effective as they were at that point in time. They didn't, quote, just work there. They were engaged in the businesses that they were involved with. And it made it, they worked well. They saw you as a helpmate in their efforts. And I saw them as a helpmate in my efforts. The rest of the company didn't always understand the nature of the kinds of customers that I was dealing with, but we changed the way we built machines and tested them as a result to improve the reliabilities. We changed our order processing techniques to meet their demands. They wanted this funny operating system called Unix. The internal securities of those machines was extremely important. They found holes in our the standard digital equipment operating systems, and they preferred Unix. And I was forced to bring, operating systems started to proliferate. And proliferating operating systems is like proliferating a bunch of standards. And that's bad news. Supporting them, interfacing them, ECOing them, bad, you don't want that. You want as few as possible, I think. And they forced me to bring Unix in from Bell Labs.
But before we get to that Unix story, let's back up a little bit and talk about you've got a successful business running now. You're kind of running it. What's your seat at the table in terms of the organization structure at DEC?
And most of that period of time, I worked for Andy Knowles. Andy was the operations committee guy, and I at DEC. My job was, a combination of strategic planning and influencing the product set, and then bringing the product set as it came into existence in the outside world. I did every now and then have a chance to poke my head up into the operations committee of the company itself. I felt accepted inside the company. People seemed to listen, and that was important because as the product became better accepted across the industry outside, it began to press, the marketplace seemed to be telling us we needed to move into something like the more commercial worlds. When originally in the machine only did floating point for scientific applications. So I had sort of convinced the world that digital arithmetic had some value. That a tenth of a cent didn't get you anywhere. You needed 1 cent, and so I had to push the company toward things like digital arithmetic. It used to be if you spent 5 or 6 or 8 hours to respond to a problem in the field, that was okay. That wasn't okay in the communications in the digital world. I mean the business world. You had to get there in less than 2 hours.
Was your responsibility running a business at that point, a product line? I guess they called product line manager.
Right. Ultimately, I ended up quotes as the product line manager responsible for the business. Quotes the business. I was the point man as the business guy, but there was a whole lot of work being done outside of my control in the environment that digital was. Manufacturing was not under my control. I had a lot of influence, but not a lot of direct control. It was a small engineering group with me, small number of marketeers, but the respect between the various functions was there. And they would listen to logic. They weren't protective of their own sphere to the point where they shut you out. So I would, I had to change the manufacturing processes because of these requirements for reliability. That was done through influence. I had to influence changes in the architecture of the computers. That was done through influence. And gradually moved the company from this technical supplier to somebody acceptable in the business world where the customers weren't knowledgeable about the computers, where they were knowledgeable about the applications that they were going to place on the machines. But you had to supply them the underlying guts in such a way that it met their requirements for the application.
So this disruptor appears on the scene called Unix. And how did you deal with that?
Well, these same things that made the features of the machine that made it attractive to the spook agencies made it attractive to Bell Labs, not so much for data processing, but as an ancillary processor to switchgear. So they would put the PDP-11 in to keep the administrative records for switching gear. And they would put these computers in the central offices. And they liked Unix.
They invented it.
They invented it. And they liked it. And for a while, they took care of the Unix. I'd ship them the operating systems that we had. They'd
install Unix.
They'd install Unix. And that was fine. That was good until they said, no, this is getting to be a burden. You install Unix. You support Unix. So they gave it to me, and they said, here, you take it. You put it on your machines. And again, I didn't want another operating system. But a customer was a customer, and they were big customers. I think at one point in time, Digital was one of the largest suppliers to AT&T. It was a big business.
And AT&T was the largest customer for DEC.
And they were the largest customer, right? So when they said jump, I said how high on the way up, you know? And because I also saw, again, logic in what they asked for. It was good business for them. And so that forced Unix into the price list of the things that digital offered. And I had to do the Unix in my own shop because the central engineering organization didn't want to deal with it. And why would they want to deal with it? It wasn't theirs. It was a rather narrow set of customers who wanted them at the time. They were big ones, but they didn't identify with it. So I did the Unix support.
So the CEO, Ken Olsen, had some words to say about Unix. How did that influence things?
How do I say? Ken liked customers. Ken liked computers. Ken liked the hardware. Ken liked the technically knowledgeable customer and so forth. But I'm not sure he had a good grasp of the software that ran the computer. So in a sense, he really didn't bother me too much, Grant, with the Unix issues. I said I'd make a certain amount of money, and I needed a certain amount of money to do that engineering and support it and so forth, and it fit in the budget, so he left me alone with that. The bigger problems were from engineering organizations who saw it as a competitive sucker-up of assets when they could have used it for some other purpose, you know, the development dollars. You know, and why do you want to support another operating system and all the other problems that come along with the operating system? But Ken, I would tell you, Ken was not an issue with that.
And a Unix is like snake oil quote that's attributed to him?
I'm sorry, you got to help me with that one.
Well, it's widely published that he said Unix is like snake oil. In other words, it's like something for everybody, and it's, you know, solves all problems.
Oh, I see.
Right. So, you know, that could have been a little bit of a problem for you, I would think.
You know, maybe that happened after I was gone.
Ah,
you know,
okay. Could be.
You know, I didn't so much hear it there. There was, I felt a lot of respect and support because the business was good. I had that support inside the company. Again, the respect from these people that I had to influence. Ken was kind of among them at that point in time. Because they were technical buyers, and we made good money with it.
Yeah, I think probably that's interesting because I don't think you're probably right that it was later that Unix became the existential threat. You know, it wasn't in that era that it became such a big deal with Sun and other competitors.
Yeah, but what you say about it, quotes threat, we're jumping ahead here a little bit, but when I left, I was worried about the threats to Unix, and I took Unix and got the central engineering organization to accept it, and they would have killed it if it was outside the organization. Another little philosophy I have sort of proven, if you take an engineering organization and you draw a white line down the middle of the room that they're in, they're going to compete with each other. You know, and you sort of needed them on the same team. And if I pushed Unix into that team without the white line down the middle of the room, then it was okay. You know? So I did that. I mean, you had to sort of understand the dynamics of engineering organizations too. And I didn't want them stomping that out because I knew it was important. Along the way here, by the way, I got very close to AT&T in the labs. At fairly high levels because you're a big supplier. Also, when we screwed them somehow by missing deliveries or shipping product that didn't work to them, you really heard about it. And they were also part of this, in addition to the spook agencies, they were part of helping to shape the way we order processed, forecast the parts. I mean, we had to meet their demands for their manufacturing processes. It was almost like just in time. When you said you were going to deliver a machine at the end of the month or on a given date, you had to do it. And that required different processes inside the company that you wouldn't normally think you had to worry about because the rest of the company didn't require that. So again, I had to shape the order processing system, the field test, the testing, the factory testing processes, and the whole delivery process had to change. And the service demands had to change. And most of it was through internal influence peddling that I did.
Can you give some examples of how the manufacturing process had to change and how the order processing had to change?
Yeah.
Just so
Well, the Unibus Unibus architecture on a piece of paper looked really neat, and it didn't look really neat when you wired it up because it didn't have just back panels. It had this white ribbon that ran all over hell because it was the Unibus was basically transmission line structure with grounds and signal carrying lines. And it had to maintain its integrity, and so you had this white ribbon floating around inside these machines that looked kind of ugly, and we had to rewire. We had to restructure that wiring in the machine itself to support the way we ran the Unibus and so forth. That's a simple version of one of the changes that we had to make. So the process for wiring the machines up changed. The machines, we built heat testing tents for completed machines in the factory floor. And we would run diagnostics on those machines and not only burn in the components, but burn in the completed machine. You know, we'd heat, and that kept them on the floor longer, that took more space. It changed your forecasting, the time periods for manufacturing, ran the costs up, and you had to talk somebody into doing that. Why do you need to do that? Well, because the machine needed to run.
Yeah, you needed to do that.
Right. So we would try to get
Burn out
the early failures, get the early failures out early on, and heat stressing seemed to do that for us. So we built plastic tents. The factory floor looked like a bunch of factory tents.
Okay.
And it was kind of brute force, but it was helpful. And then you had to have spares, and you had to have the components to build the machines. And we were forecasting at a pretty low level. We weren't forecasting complete machines, and because you never quite knew what the mix of products was going to be required. So we developed software to do statistical forecasting of the product mix. And that, again, was done independent of the rest of the company. I had to do that in my own shop. Used mumps for that, by the way. Years later, I found guys running junkyards using mumps. Mumps turn out to be a very useful product. And
what is mumps?
Mumps is another operating system.
Yeah, but maybe you could tell us where it came from.
No, I can't. It came out of the medical research laboratories that another part of the company developed. And I really never saw much about it. The folks inside, it was actually Tom Stockybrand that wrote that mumps inventory control system for me.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I've ever even personally seen mumps, but I know it was done on mumps.
I think, yeah. Out of the medical, Mass General or something.
It was a project with Mass General.
Yeah,
I
okay.
remember when that.
Yeah, all right.
happened.
And it became a pretty useful database kind of system, I think.
Yes, and I wish I knew more about it because that was usable by the uninitiated to some extent. It was programmable at a fairly high level, and maybe a little Excel-like in a sense, probably. And it turned out to be very, very useful. And we had to change that. A lot of things about it that we had to change for the marketplace.
Any good stories about the interaction with AT&T?
Yeah, AT&T had its own politics going on inside, between the labs and the operating companies. And along the way, they started to develop their own computer. They were buying so much from us, I think they decided they may make their own. So they started to build a machine. I think it was called a 3B. It was a 32-bit computer. And I got a little nervous about what that might do to our business. That was my first concern. And then I got a little concerned for the company itself. I had seen plenty of people deciding they could do something better inside than you could buy. And that's another kiss of death. If there's somebody's making a really good thing on the outside, just buy it and use it. Automobile company doesn't have to make tires, for example. At any rate, so I did something which was a little audacious at that time. I went to Ken and I said, we're going to lose this business if they succeed making that computer, or we don't try to sidetrack it in some way that's constructive. I said, I would like to offer them a license to the VAX at that time. Not the PD, this was beyond that. This was VAX days. And Ken had steadfastly refused to license anything. It was his and very protective of it. And I was almost a little surprised he agreed to that. I said, we'll offer him a license, and with the proviso that they make some and buy some and so forth. But they had other reasons to use microprocessors, and if they were compatible with our machines, it would make the strength of our offerings even greater, because it would be basically engineered into the guts of their product set. And he agreed to that. And he agreed to that in a little bit of a left-handed way. He said, you offer that to them, and then if we don't like the deal that they come back with, we can tell them the board of directors didn't approve it. It was always, he would use the board. Yeah, it was just the devil made me do it. So I made that offer, and I made the offer to a guy by the name of Frank Vigilante, who ran all of Bell Labs, AT&T's engineering efforts. I knew Frank pretty well. And he graciously accepted the offer and then pocket vetoed it. And there was another guy there who Archie McGill at the time was the marketing manager for AT&T. And Archie was all positive about this offering, but Frank pocket vetoed it. And later on, and I looked up Frank Vigilante recently because I got curious about it. And they actually viewed that as, I didn't realize it at the time, but that they viewed that as a business opportunity. They really wanted to extend that architecture into a full-fledged computer offering.
This is 3B.
The 3B.
Yeah, right. They wanted to be in the computer business.
They wanted to be in the computer business. I don't think I fully realized it at the time. But that's one of the reasons. It's probably a good idea they didn't do it. It would have cost them a lot of money along the way. But they attempted it, apparently.
And it never
took off. No.
Right.
Never.
But that, Ken trusted my judgment in that, and we never had to do anything with that. But that's an indication of how important that customer was to us, and the relationship we had with them. And it was very intimate.
Earlier than that, there was a big debate about licensing the PDP-11. Did you have a voice in that?
No, don't know anything about what. Not that I recall.
I had a question about the various operating systems that were offered on PDP-11. At the time it's being introduced, or in the early days when you're the marketing manager and become the product manager, could you talk to me about, it always seemed peculiar from the outside how many different operating systems were available, and then one of them sort of became the dominant one,
VMS?
No, on the 11.
On the 11?
On the 11.
On the 11, the one that Cutler did.
Well, Cutler extended RT11 on the. It was basically RT11 almost all the time.
Oh, all right.
All right. Now we tried something else with in the commercial. The commercial world wanted more transaction-oriented structure, and so we built a thing called RISTIS. I don't remember what it stood for anymore. That was moderately successful, but not terribly successful. Maybe you can help me along with.
Well, yeah, I think there were, RT11 was the beginning, and then I think Cutler did a couple, or maybe not the first, but there was an RSX11M and a D, and then Ristus. I think so. There's like 4 of them, I think, ultimately that were sold. But I think the RSX11,
Yeah.
I forget
was
the model.
interested whether there was a story behind RSX11 and its emergence as
Yeah.
No, I just think we ran into the limitations on RT11, and Cutler produced the thing, which I always assumed was an extension of RT11. I can't tell you that I knew.
were involved. Yeah.
No, I wasn't really involved with it. It looked like it was an improvement. It was a much richer richer machine, but it's still a real-time operating system, right? But I did learn that you don't like a lot of operating systems.
Lots of money.
Lots of money.
Yeah,
lots of support questions all over the place.
And drivers for every peripheral.
And drivers for every peripheral. Drivers are interesting problems. You know that today. Modern day world still has problems with drivers.
Yep. So the 11 is really successful. Bigger ones are coming out, and you start focusing DEC towards the commercial market. And what does the commercial market mean in terms of where DEC was at the time?
Well, DEC's original customers used to have. I used to say the salesmen were in white coats and wore, brass rats, the MIT rings on their fingers, and sold to people that were dressed the same way. And that worked out fine for a while. But then as the market grew and the capabilities of the machine grew at the demands of the customers, starting with data communications capability, people wanted to solve more commercial data processing kinds of environments. And that required, as I said, a different kind of operating system and structure. Decimal arithmetics required disks, required data communications meeting standards, required interfaces with IBM because they owned the data of the world. It required an appreciation for what the customer really valued, which were things like their data, like their communication standard, like their human interfaces on the machines. So you started to think about the machine's outer shells rather than the hardcore inner parts of the machine. You start to move toward the user levels. And that required a better understanding of what the customer problem was, which sort of moved me, and then I sort of tried to move the company off to where it started to focus on kinds of customers, banking versus a medical lab, for example. It's a different kind of customer. He thinks differently, talks differently. He has different needs. And so that was important. And you couldn't train a salesman to deal with both a lab and the commercial a bank, for example, or an insurance company. So we needed to learn more internally, and we needed to have the company better lined up with the buying customer, and that sort of moved. And I felt I was one of the major movers in that, to try to move the company toward different alignments. PDP-11 became a dominant factor inside the company for a while, and then it became too big to deal with in just that way. So we started to cut that up into more customer-focused kinds of environments so that the marketing was more attuned. You needed a brochure that appealed to the lab guy differently than a brochure that appealed to the banking customer. Banking customers wanted the products for switching purposes, among other things. and the communications gear and so forth. Now, gradually that moved, everything changed. Service requirements, as I said, changed. The way you talk to them changed, and we had to structure the alignment in the company accordingly. And I was the guy who started to push on that. It was very frustrating, by the way. It's, I had no direct influence over a lot of that. It was all, I couldn't order anything. So I was off peddling influence continuously. I spent more time internally than externally focused.
So the 11's grown up to the 1145, the 1170, the VAX comes in late in, after that. And so those provide new opportunities to
oh yes, right. Now
bigger super mini computers for
right.
the first time.
Along the way, by the way, it's interesting. I used to use Apple as an example of a systems company. Now they're not systems in a different sense. They built, internal to the structure of the Apple was a system. You could plug applications into that system. You could plug user interfaces into that system, and a guy who never saw the Apple, used one application, could walk up to the Apple and run it in another one. Here was an example of a common structure that was very valuable to the user. And I learned early on that scalability and interconnectability and preserving the customer's training on the user interface and his data was important. And therefore, when people were poking around for ways to expand computing capability, and we had a great 36-bit machine help build the company, time sharing, PDP-10, and I didn't see that as the future. So I spent a lot of time hassling over where the company would go from as it stepped up in terms of size. And it was just a bear to try to connect the PDP-11 into a 36-bit machine. And so I argued for the 32-bit machine. So I spent time influencing that. And the standards in databases and standards in architecture, to me, became very valuable. And I think I first learned that by looking at the way Apple built their internals for the little desktop machine, because it was, in fact, a small system in and unto itself. Very powerful. And I used that example to people to try to get them to understand, no, we go 32 bits and not 36.
Any particular targets in that commercial world that you went after, either competitors or opportunities?
At one point in time, Ken got enamored with the commercial world. This looks good, right? And he asked me to go. We were on the periphery of it with this data communication stuff. He says, why don't you take a swing at the commercial applications? To him, word processing was kind of a commercial application. And, it was, of sorts. It was a user who just sat down at the machine and did things that happened in an office, for example. And he asked me to do that. And I wrote a business plan, which there's a story behind that, too. I wrote this business plan, and I don't know, it's in 25 pages or something, which for me was big. And, I brought it to the operations committee to present that, and he says, I'm not interested in that stuff. Give me the last 3 pages. He didn't care. He wasn't going to sit through the rest of it. He only wanted the last 3 pages. So I went, I gave my spiel the best I could on the last 3 pages. And I finished up with that. And basically what we figured was the place we had capabilities was not, this is IBM's world. And the place we had some capabilities that looked like vulnerabilities to me was the same space that Wang was in, which was in the office doing the word processing. They had shared word processors. They were the glimmer of, they didn't have email as such, but they had the ability to move documents around between these things. And I saw that as a place that we probably could compete. And I made a very audacious statement. I hesitate to even say it here.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Who's going to contradict you?
Digital used to, you know this, digital used to buy used, old dead computer company buildings. You know, they bought shopping centers and they bought, RCA building, they bought this building, that building. When the other competitors died out for various reasons, the real estate was less expensive. And at the time, Wang was going gangbusters and a problem. And I told him I would buy him the Wang Towers at below cost. And, so we set about to penetrate that area and did. I'm not exactly sure how, but it was a lot of hard work and some great software and products. And networking and disks were the backbone of that. They were more integrated structures and systems. We were better at integrating with the IBM databases. You could go in and connect in and out of the system more readily. And that was a strength against Wang. So we basically were able to nudge Wang out of the way and get a foothold in the commercial environments. And then electronic mail grew out of DARPA and the work with the spook agencies and the universities. So that was sort of in my shop too, and that was a good lever. Those are big leverages.
Yeah.
But the discs, we had great discs. Grant Savier's there.
Yeah,
later. and we had offerings that were broader and deeper, and it was very helpful. To hit IBM head on in data processing looked like foolishness.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So that was very, very useful. Plus, we were able to lever the networking and the electronic mail capabilities that we through from DARPA and the universities.
So, what other interesting things happened at DEC on your way? You were there, 15 years?
Just about 15 years.
Yeah. So the commercial world is starting to explode, and more opportunities there. And the telephone industry stuff is really going well. What's happening?
Well, the company started to be more focused on commercial than most things. The scientific side of things was fairly stable, and the commercial side of the world was growing, and the networking was becoming more and more important. We produced some standards, Ethernet standards, and what can I say? The world got more dynamic. Ken got more difficult for me to work with because his views of the commercial world were this again. Ken's strength wasn't software. Ken's strength wasn't user interfaces and things like that. I'm not to be absolutely, and again, I'm not being pejorative here. I'm not sure Ken actually used a computer. He loved them, and he loved what they did, but I'm not sure he actually sat down at a keyboard and used it himself. I personally got into some stresses because I saw the world differently than he did. I saw the user needs, and I would, for example, he put pressure on me to do things like include the PDP-8 in the word processing structures I want to use PCs. He didn't want IBM PCs supported in the environment and that caused me stress. And I would tell him things like, the customer has no idea what's in the box, Ken. Customer doesn't care what's in the box. Customer cares what it does for them, what it looks like, what it feels like, and the computer inside is sort of irrelevant. And he would have a hard time with that. And I think at some point in time he came around to understanding that. But to me, my view of that, it was no longer the computer business, it was customer solutions, customer applications. It was their needs, and I don't care what's in the box. I wanted to use what I could get that was inexpensive, and the architectures and structures supported it. We had a great time-sharing machine, PDP-10. It did great word processing. It echoed every character, and it was using dumb terminals to echo. Well, and we did the same thing for a while with VAXs and so forth, and the cost per terminal was getting to be pretty high, and I was limited in terms of numbers of terminals I could support in these systems environments. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to use things. Well, I did my own calculations and determined that if I used active terminals and less echoing and less bandwidth, that I could get the cost per terminal actually down, the cost per seat. And I proved that to myself. Ken didn't buy that. Ken would not accept that. And he insisted that I was using dumb terminals or PDP-8s and so forth. And I hate to admit this again, but I sort of snuck the PCs into that structure without real authorization. And I was forced to do things like, he didn't believe in color in the office. I had to bring color in, and things of that nature. So there was a struggle going on between he and I that got to be somewhat personal. My view, I saw this as the future, and it's a little like the engineer who doesn't want to let go of his dream,
Yeah. And
so at some point that was going to reach a breaking point. But then Ken was reluctant to see some of these changes at times, and then got in step with them later on when there was a degree of success shown with it and so forth. Mm-hmm. But we are pushing again toward customer functionality and capability, and less toward the hardware, and the internals of the machine itself became less important. A little side story, I know that you've probably heard this before. Jobs didn't want the Macs connected to IBM PCs. He was violently opposed to that. And if that had, well, that's still the case. It's still not used in the commercial worlds, and the Mac is still not the heart of Apple. Right. The heart of Apple is the iPhone, and we had a little of that going on, and I lived it, so I can definitely appreciate it. That if I hadn't pushed off toward integrating the PCs and so forth, it would have been a fairly serious problem. So it caused stress and struggle for me at Digital, big time.
Wow.
Yeah. There are many things that I learned from Ken, his treatment of customers and his treatment of employees. I learned at Digital that the great things that make a company great were things like a company you'd work for, a company you'd invest in, and in a company you'd buy from. All those things are important. Even today, I had a grandchild ask me, he said, is there something legislatively wrong with the fact that Amazon isn't paying taxes? So my answer to him was that the companies can exist for other reasons, right? In terms of the employees that they have, those responsibilities, and the community at large. The economic benefits are huge beyond the taxes that they pay, and I think I learned that at Digital, and it might have been from Ken Olson, right? So there was a lot of greatness there. But software wasn't one of them.
Anything else you want to say about your digital experience?
Yeah, that's it. Digital was a unique place. I saw a lot of customers, spent a reasonable amount of time with them. And sometimes I'd walk out of the customer's place and I'd say, they aren't going to succeed. Or I'd come out almost like screaming with the stresses that I felt inside the company, political stresses, a mixture of incompetence and struggles that existed inside these companies. And you just could tell that they had a non-productive internal environment. And you could feel that as a salesman going in trying to sell them computers. And Digital was a unique place. Digital, again, I'm sure you've heard it many times, Digital was a place where everybody thought they had a major role in the success of the company. And you could have major fights, but there still wasn't a hell of a lot of politics, relatively speaking, inside the company. It was a place where you made friends. They were meaningful friends. It was a place of high stress, and everybody's doing things they never did before in their lives. But it was a big family, and it definitely felt different than any place I've ever been since then or ever was before it. It was a super place, and I was very thankful. Again, I'm lucky I took the job offer. It was the only one I had.
So one question I have is the thoughts you have, having been at DEC during its growth into a dominant mini computer company, and then its various transitions until it stopped growing and started to contract. You saw all of that from an insider point of view, and my observation is you have a good strategic sense. You understand, you get strategy. Talk to us about, some of the evolution of DEC's strategy and some of the problems it had continuing to evolve.
Well, your key word you mentioned was evolve, because I think you measure the greatness of any company by its ability to manage change, internal change, response to external stimulus, and so forth. And in the case of Digital, it started off as this lab coat, technical-oriented company. And it changed a number of different dimensions. And I'm pleased to say that I helped move some of them along, but it moved technically, from like 8 bits, 16 bits. I mean, they sound like nits, but they're not nits when you consider the importance of the software and the architectures and so forth. But they were able to evolve with technology, core disks to solid state, rotating disks. They able to embrace newer technologies and evolve internally, make those changes in architecture. They were able to evolve in terms of the service contents of what they offered customers. They were able to modify and change the operating systems. They changed the marketplaces they went to. They changed the language with which they talked to the customer. Things of that nature. And if you don't make those transitions in time and in response to the market opportunities, you can't grow. And then the company starts to flounder. If the marketplace is growing and you're not, then you get all kinds of internal squabbles and so forth, which then finally collapse the place. You spoke, Gardner, about the way excellence seems to collect excellence, or whether strong people will then hire stronger people to themselves. When the company is in a strong position, has a strong reputation, growing, you're able to attract the people that you need to execute those, the competitive, execute in the competitive arena where you are. And digital was able to do that very well for a while. And there were times when the good people kept flowing across my desk, or I had them actually working in the organization. I didn't have enough good jobs to give them. They were better than what they were doing, and I don't know what to do with them. I mean, they were so good, and the opportunities, they were better than the opportunities. We collected excellence. And when companies fail, it's when you fail to recognize the impinging changes and don't manage the change properly. Channels of distribution, really a key decision for any technical company. The business model has to match that, and if you've built your company around a direct channel of distribution model, and then suddenly the product margins drop, the approach becomes more of a commodity, you have to sell indirectly, and you fail to recognize that transition, then you're going to die. And I think to some extent that happened. DEC's view of the need for large machines, it's interesting, of course, that they built the company on the use of small machines competing with large ones, and then they got eaten by small machines because of the DEC's focus on the large machines to some extent. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but they weren't positioned to compete from a business model standpoint because they didn't manage that change effectively. And so, as I say, my bottom line statement is excellence in a company is measured by its ability to manage change. See it coming and make the necessary changes, some of which might be very painful. But it's never easy, but if you were going to build a company that lasts 25, 30 years, even the automotive industry today exhibits that, right? They're running like hell to keep up with the changes that are facing them. And if you don't execute that change, timely fashion, well, you lose. And that's really, I think, what happened to digital.
Okay.
Yeah, the PC was the attack from below, just like the PDP-11 and the
PDP-8 before.
PDP-8 before. It was the attack from below that changed the industry.
And digital could have participated more aggressively, not aggressively, more smartly maybe, I don't know what the word would be, more effectively in it, although it's a really tough business, right? The margins are small, you have to move very quickly, the channels of distribution were an issue, even those changed dramatically at times. It was really a tough business. The people who survived in that, even the leader industry got out of it. Mm-hmm. In the case of IBM, it got to be too much for them to deal with, or they chose to put their money elsewhere. So these are tough things. And now the iPads and this computer in your pocket with the phone, these are all impacting the industry. So, well, that's what makes the technology business a fun business.
So much fun, right? Right. Staying up at night wondering if I'm going to have a job tomorrow.
But DEC did a great job at managing those transitions for a while.
And from my perspective, it is, at least a number of those transitions can personally, we were talking earlier about whether company founders can make transitions, and there's several, there's 3 or 4, somewhere on that order of magnitude that Ken was able to stay with what was needed. In the end, he got way behind, I think, but at least for many of those years, his leadership of digital changed enough that he didn't hold the company back.
In retrospect, I was honored by the level of trust that a number of people put in me there to make some of those changes, because I was always kind of pushing that stuff. In little ways, the sales department, the leadership, Ted Johnson there, Ted would listen, and he would adjust to the field. And we'll see later on, we'll talk about Xerox. They didn't want to listen and adjust. But it was possible within Xerox to influence people without direct control over them. They listened, and they saw your logic, and they would trust you as an individual. At least I felt that kid. Didn't feel that way at the time, by the way.
Okay. That's important.
Didn't feel that way at the time, but in retrospect, that was...
And in comparison.
And in comparison, it was just a great place. And not everybody has that opportunity, and I got that opportunity at DEC.
Good.
So we're coming to like the mid-1980s here, 83, 84, and...
I'm frustrated at digital. I said to you earlier, off camera, there were times that I end up in screaming matches inside the company with leadership because they didn't see the world the way I did, and I was committed to that, and I had the products, and I knew they were right, and I'm not saying that for self-aggrandizement. It proved out to be that case. They become very important products in the longer run, and I literally came home shaking at times, from work. It was really a high stress situation. High stress internally, not high stress by the market. It was driven by internal stuff. And so I left, and I joined Encore. I went there because, Gordon was there, Burkhart was there, and Ken Fisher was there, but I was really drawn there by Burkhart and Gordon.
Okay.
And that was an abortive period of time, in my opinion. These guys couldn't get along, and we didn't have the best engineering staff, missed some deliveries. Conceptually, a reasonable idea. Product was probably okay. In the case of the multiprocessors, which I believed in thoroughly. By the way, I got into multiprocessor in areas of interest because of the need for multiprocessors for reliability with the spook agencies and with the phone company. Which, by the way, at Digital, there was no interest whatsoever in multiprocessors. I had conversations with them individually inside the company and so forth, and there were certain people I could not get them to pay attention at all. So I was getting no support internally for it. So that was another thing that drew me to Encore. I believed in multiprocessors for either both scalar and transactional work. And Encore was a learning experience for me. And Encore basically tried to take on too many things at once, believed they could solve the world's problems, and then didn't deliver the heart of the machine in a timely fashion. And then there were some internal issues. I'm not even aware of all that went on in there in terms of not so much cooking books or what have you, but just the whole process wasn't as honest in the operation as I think it might have been. And in retrospect, some guys actually got into trouble legally over it, including Burkhart, by the way. But I stayed there for a limited period of time, about 3 years.
What was your job there?
I was the marketing manager.
Okay.
And Gordon got into tussles with Ken Fisher. He was promoting me for different jobs inside the company, I think Gordon was. I didn't know anything about it. And later on, I find out about it, and that made Ken Fisher nervous with me. Anyhow, it was not a good experience. And maybe it's true of a lot of startups, but the really good talent was not able to dig down deep and take advantage of the knowledge that was there. Burkhardt, by the way, he tried to do a number of different things in the company, of course, being Burkhardt. I mean, he was really trying to run everything. Not just the architecture, he was trying to run the financial issues, he was trying to run manufacturing, the strategic planning. He did everything except basically interface the outside world. At least he attempted to do that. Anyhow, that's a...
Well, he did the same thing at Data Joe.
Oh, he did?
Yes, he fundamentally ran the finance. And he was very strong in the strategic part of the company in the early days, certainly.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
What he couldn't, what I don't think I'm not sure he could manage himself. It's what the issue was there. But anyhow, so I left.
And this was kind of, the company was kind of coming apart when you left. Is that
Yeah,
what-
it was. It was, and I was struggling. I wasn't being heard, and
Had
so
Gordon left yet? When you left? I mean, of course, Gordon and Hendrie both left. Hendrie Burkhardt both left.
Gordon was still there, I think.
He was still there.
Yeah. And then I needed a job. Like I said, when you fix your income tax problem by getting rid of your income, it's not advisable. So I needed a job, and I started to talk to. There were a lot of jobs that were around, by the way, over the years, and almost none of them were any good when you finally really looked at them. And only almost everything that came around ended badly. Offline, we can talk about some of them, but then, so I went to work. Actually, I had a longer-term desire to go into the venture capital business with the guys that I went to work for Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe, and J.H. Whitney, in running this little business that they had called Genographics. And so that was another 2 or 3 year adventure into a field. Well, I sort of liked the technology and the products, but that was under huge pressure from graphic capability on PCs.
Tell us a little more about what
Tell us-
Genographics
yeah,
did.
Yeah, tell us about the business and the product.
Genographics had two businesses, really. They they made a console and a camera that allowed artists to produce high-resolution graphic slides. So they had this gadget that would write on the slides using high-resolution cathode ray tubes. Very carefully selected tubes with minimal faults on the surface. And the software was very elaborate and allowed a lot of creativity on the part of the artist. By the way, it was not intuitive to run that. These were trained. You needed an artist who had this capability of creation, as well as you needed somebody who would be able to learn the technology itself. And then you need the camera to produce the slides. And then they ran a service business, 30 or so service centers where people like you and Grant could write your pitch out and take it in there, and they'd produce the slides for you. That got to be very competitive, with people being in, with the consoles and the camera itself were expensive. And turns out they could be replaced with a PC, really. So that business was really running uphill against a technological change again. How fast can you change? Well, I traded a piece of the company to Chrysler Corporation for an internal technology that they had that would run on PC. And then kept developing the product along those lines. And then, interestingly enough, some of the folks inside the company went off and created a relationship with Microsoft. And a good share of Genegraphics graphics is now part of PowerPoint. And that helped save the company for a while. And you know, and this is the early days of, quotes, Office. And then this wasn't, again, a terribly satisfying job for me. I sold the hardware side of the business to Pansophic, who immediately went bankrupt. I hope it wasn't because they bought what I sold them. And then I never was a guy who wanted to run service bureaus. So I fired myself and then went out looking for another job. You know, again, need that income.
So what was it like negotiating with Microsoft on the PowerPoint?
That was, I would say that was courteous. It was all right. Some other people down the road, at Xerox, I was in the business of trying to build working relationships with people, and that turned out to be a little bit tougher. Microsoft wasn't nearly as bad as the reputation has, I don't think. For us, they liked the product. It was a warm relationship. We weren't very demanding. Microsoft wasn't very demanding. It's something that I think added a great deal to the momentum for Office.
Okay, what do you remember? Any details about what it was you were selling to Microsoft, so I could understand it a little bit better?
Mostly the artwork, the graphics database, the scalable digitized graphics. We had a very large database of artifacts, elements, and those became part of the PowerPoint structure.
So that then somebody could manipulate
Yes.
those and put the different artifacts together.
Yeah, but we had built those in a scalable
In
fashion,
scalable form. Yeah.
scalable form, so that you could adjust the sizes and shapes and so forth. They were fully digitized.
Okay, cool.
And that's really what they got out of it. It wasn't a lot of money. It was some help. It probably was more help to Microsoft, but it's just an interesting thing that happened along the way.
Okay.
So I left, and
Were the venture capitalists happy with the results?
they got their money out.
So the answer is yes.
So I left, and just an interesting story that does go back to digital. I had a number of women working in the organization. Was always a pretty good sponsor of women. One of them was Janice Stiles, who you may have known. She's a lady engineer, and she worked in the shop doing in the marketing function. And Janice had bounced around and what have you afterwards, and she ended up at Hendrie and Struggles. And the job came up at Xerox, and she saw it go by, and she recommended me for the job at Xerox. So what goes around comes around, right? And that was very helpful. Xerox was a good place to go to work at that particular time. I went there, was actually interviewed for the marketing manager's job, and I had enough experience in various companies, both that I sold to and within digital, to know that in a highly divisionalized company, a corporate marketing manager is cannon fodder. He's got no control over anything, right? And that's a dangerous position. So I hemmed and hawed over that for a while, and they actually hired me over there to do the engineering and manufacturing job ultimately.
Okay.
I went to work for Bill Lowe, who ran IBM's PC business, and then came to Xerox under the agreement that he would be the CEO when they sold the was going to be president when they sold the finance business, which was about a third or so of Xerox at that time. And I ended up working for him, was going to take his job. Over time, primary jobs at Xerox in the early days were international trade negotiations with the Japanese. Somebody determined I was reasonable at that sort of thing, I guess. I got paid to do it, didn't like it, but I did negotiate a trade agreement with basically Fuji for a technology license between Xerox and Fuji, and also a purchase agreement for, turns out Xerox was buying a lot of equipment from Fuji Xerox, and I negotiated the price arrangements on that. And that took about 2 years of time. And it was a lot of money.
And the objective of doing that was getting in the small printer business? Is that?
No, it's a different effort.
Different effort.
No,
okay.
this was all of Xerox. It had to do with license agreements, and it had to do with partitioning territory to some extent. So field of use licenses defined what they would do with all of Xerox's technology, and Xerox would do with all of their technology, and where those would be practices. I mean, it's fully legal, field of use licenses for patents, but that turned out to be very key in the longer run at Xerox. It's good fences make good partners.
Yes.
And a complete understanding, self-policing arrangements between organizations is necessary to really maintain good operating partnerships. The other thing I did at Xerox is I defined most of their processes for establishing partnerships.
Okay. Were there any particular important technologies that that Xerox wanted from Fuji, and vice versa? Same question the other way.
Not specifically. I mean, there wasn't this identified or that identified. It was a bucket of everything they had and everything Xerox had. It said, it was tit for tat and some money.
Okay.
That exchanged hands in that case.
All right.
The really key thing here was sort of the field of use licenses, which defined territories.
Yes.
We're going to explore with Mark some of the details of how Fuji Xerox and Xerox US built this relationship and cross-licensing.
Well, that's a classic that's written up in Harvard Business and so forth. That partnership itself was magnificent. Xerox had these great products and was trying to expand on a worldwide basis. You couldn't do that effectively either financially or from establishing your own subsidiaries and so forth. So they worked this out with the Rand Corporation in Europe, and in the case of Japan and the Far East, they worked with Fuji Corporation, and they established the Fuji Xerox subsidiary, and they put in place some things that are classically studied in business school. How to do the right partnership the right way, in such a way that it's self-sustaining, self-policing. You don't have to go argue every single thing, that it operates in a natural way. Everybody doesn't have to know all the fine details to make it work, all of that type of thing. That was done in that relationship. It's a classic case of how to do a good partnership. And part of it had to do with these good fences. Here's all of my benefits for you. You give me all of your benefits, and you sell over there, we'll sell over here, basically, is what that agreement was. And it uses patent law here. It used patent law. MIDI and Japan was involved with this stuff. And patents are a big deal in Japan, as you know. And as they don't mean anything in China, right? And that was a very good relationship. And so I got an opportunity to negotiate that arrangement, which came up every 10 years, by the way, and then it sort of started from scratch with, Fuji and Fuji Xerox positioning over here and us positioning over there and trying to find some middle ground for the parameters to make that work. And in the case of places like Japan, they'd love to be able to sell product into your territory. That's just a genetic issue over there, I think.
Sell it everywhere.
I'm going to sell it everywhere. And there, by the way, they were very good. Fuji Xerox was a really good company. They had good technology. They had hardworking people. They built quality products. Was a very nice relationship. And then Xerox coveted the small printer market. They never were happy with the fact they invented the small printer, right? It was one of the bucket of things that they had at Park at one moment. As I said, when I was being hired over there, they gave me this book, Fumbling the Future, for the way Xerox mismanaged their affairs in the computer business, basically. Mm-hmm. And at one point in time at Park, they had graphics terminals, graphics languages, languages to program with, the networking, the mouse, and laser printers. When you come right down to it, what the hell else is there in the computer industry, right? And the printer, the small printer, was part of the business. And Xerox was very big in sys-out printers that dumped IBM databases. Instead of chain printers, they used laser printers, and they were very big at that. But not in the small office printer, which required not so much different technology, but different channels of distribution, pricing, and so forth. So they wanted to go in that business. They said, and Fuji Xerox wanted to go in the business. And so I developed a trading partnership with them and some financial matters, again, that were self-sustaining and didn't require a lot of policing. And I put together a trading company. Fuji Xerox developed the engines. We jointly sold those engines to people like Apple, for example, and others, and they would then put their own labels on them. And that was moderately successful for a while. That was another couple of years worth of effort in there. But again, this was a peripheral activity to the hardcore of Xerox.
When you say it was moderately successful for a year, I mean, what happened?
No, for a while, yeah.
Yeah, for a while. What happened that it didn't keep going and become a major force in the PC printer business, let's say?
Well, in order to be, if you're an OEM supplier, which basically Xerox was in this particular case, that's one piece of the business. You can't be a successful OEM supplier unless you have successful OEM customers, right?
It's true.
Right? That's a partnership. That's not
That's
just
a criteria
customer.
for success.
That's right. They got to be successful
Sell
too.
to somebody who's going to be successful.
They ain't no buy nothing, right? So I mean, that's a kind of a partnership, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they had a hard time making margins on it. That's basically it. It's just the business, the margins in there are so low, even with the, it's all a toner business. There's nothing.
Supplies, right?
Supplies.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's not the razor; it's the razor blades.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. But it's just the margins are low in there and tough. And one of the major, Compaq was a customer, and Compaq had its own set of problems, and that sort of wandered out. It's still existing. They're still doing this. I bought a Dell printer a few years ago, and opened it up, and I recognized it as a Fuji Xerox gut.
Yeah.
So that Dell printers probably have Fuji Xerox printing engines in it that company I put together has sold. Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of thing. You don't see them. Mm-hmm. There are a few others that have been successful. Brother doesn't do that. They do their own and so forth. But it's one of the things I did there. That's not an issue with Xerox so much, except that it did reveal the fact that the hard core of the company had a hard time accepting something new and different, or that might impinge their space in some way.
When you said their space, are you talking from a political point of view?
No, political and financial.
Yes.
Xerox was a highly bonused company,
Okay.
and everybody worked for their bonus. And if you were doing something that required them to, which is kind of a story, but you stand up in front of the sales organization and you introduce this new great product. And then you ask the salespeople, well, what do you think about the product? They say, I don't know, what's my commission? Very true.
Okay.
Very true.
All right.
Right? They are absolutely hardcore, 100%, not 100% I don't think, but close to it, commission driven.
Yes.
So if you came up with this dinky product that took a lot of time to sell, and the time constant to sell an OEM and get it incorporated in the business is long.
Right.
That is not salesmen don't appeal to it. I use my own sales force. I couldn't use the sales force.
Yes.
Didn't fit. So it was a peripheral business that the hardcore of Xerox didn't care at all about, except for the boss who told me to do this, and so we got the thing. Got off the ground, it's still running.
Okay.
And this is a long time ago. And Fuji Xerox still making the engines, and they're still being sold here, but they're sold under, you never see them because they're sold under, it's an OEM business sold under a Dell label, for example.
Yeah, okay, good.
Did you get involved at all with the big engines, the Docutech products and so on? On-demand printing engines and things like that?
I'm going to say no. But only at one point in time it worked for me, but I didn't have a hell of a lot to do with it, really. I mean, it was kind of an island unto itself, but it worked for me in the context of the development side, because, as I said, I was supposed to run engineering and manufacturing ultimately for Xerox, so I was kind of in that position for a short period of time, but I'll basically tell you no. Mm-hmm. It was a very big development, very successful, I think, inside the company. I don't claim any credit for that at all, except keeping the roof from leaking over that organization. And there's a lot of technology in it. You think computers are complex. A printer, a big printer is one of the most complex, physically demanding things you can conceive of. There's electrostatics, there's paper handling at high speeds, there's it stressed the computers that are inside of those things to the absolute cycle limits. It physically, there were all kinds of little things that would wear out and affect the movement of the paper, the registrations of those images, especially, in the color things and so forth. It is the fact that it works at all is amazing. Seriously. It's
like a disk drive.
Like
it's amazing. It's
exactly.
amazing it works at all.
It's got all analog limitations in it, all over the place, right? And those are always difficult to control, right? Digital stuff's not too bad. Analog, it's a bear, right? So it's full of it. And that machine, it was an amazing machine. And it did work well, and it's still a winner inside of the company there. Yeah.
That reminds me, there was an intersection between Xerox and DEC that you were involved with when you were on the DEC side, right?
DEC?
Yeah, didn't Xerox come and want to put that computer inside the big print machines? Weren't they kind of snuggling up to DEC to? Wasn't there a meeting between the layer?
We snuggled up to DEC as part of my efforts when I was at Xerox.
Oh, at Xerox.
At
Okay.
Xerox.
So there was a meeting between Allaire and Ken at one time that
right.
was kind of
Yeah.
science fiction, strange.
Strange. That's strange. Yeah. My job, my big job, finally ended up my big job at Xerox, was to break the walls of the divisions, which were very structured, and get my song and dance, which is, standards established across the divisions for interconnectability and interchangeability of documents, digital information, and so forth. User interface they standardized pretty well. They were known for a beautiful user interface. The green button you smash and so forth. But the products couldn't talk to each other because the divisions didn't talk to each other, because their bonuses weren't related on that, that kind of thing. So I, again, got stuck in one of these positions of influence, and I ran a process whereby we gradually moved the products toward standards. And my concern was also that I wanted to be able to interconnect these in networks, corporate networks. I needed business partners for that. I needed Microsoft for that. I needed digital for that. I needed people that were big in the computer business for that, and it probably wasn't going to be IBM.
Yeah.
So that's a thing I did, which is try to establish those relationships, and going up to digital with Ken Olson and Allaire was, sort of along those lines. We had a lot of other things going on at different levels, but and that was moderately successful. We really wanted the sales forces in those companies to sell our products.
Yes.
To push them, they were in there. Why not just sell some of this stuff while you're in there, and help us with the standards, and show the customer how he could build an integrated office automation system that went all the way from the desktop to paper, and and through the disks, and allowed it to be OCR'd over here and filed over there, and all the things that you want in an integrated paper system, which, by the way, is largely available now, I think. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't then, and that was really kind of my job there.
What would you like to say about that meeting?
Ken gave his view of some things, again, primarily associated with sort of the present and the past, and not a whole lot about his view of the future. He actually relied on me, even in that meeting when I wasn't there, to sort of sponsor the view of what the future might be. And Allaire saw problems within digital at that time. So that meeting was close to when Ken left.
Okay, 88.
Very close to it,
89.
almost within weeks.
Okay.
Yes, within weeks, and he sensed the tensions and issues at that time. Mm-hmm. Allaire was very perceptive in that regard. Mm-hmm. I worked a lot with Allaire, and Allaire was a good boss. He listened, he understood. He was an excellent financial engineer. He understood financial manipulations and so forth. That's a bad word. Financial engineering.
Mm-hmm. Financial engineering, that's
right.
a good word.
Right?
Yep, that's a good word.
And that was at the hardcore of what I was doing with Japan.
Yeah.
And in structuring those financial arrangements in such a way, as I say, it was self-correcting. When something was getting out of whack, the numbers told you were getting out of whack, and the pressure was to correct. So that's what I mean by self-correcting structures. Mm-hmm. You can't have somebody policing it and slamming fists on the table to make that work.
Mm-hmm. The financial metrics have to be right.
Right.
Yeah.
And they have to be self-adjusting.
And self-adjusting and for the benefits of the partners. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And he was good at that. Allaire was an engineer, but he could read a financial statement like nobody ever met. Yeah.
So you were at Xerox for how long?
10 years.
10 years.
Wow.
Okay. And kind of what brought it to a conclusion?
I had a 10-year, basically I went there on what amounted to a 10-year contract. I had a deal with them. I'd go there, do work for 10 years. They offered me a retirement, a reasonable retirement. And, and they asked me to do a number of different things, most of which were focused on this systemizing of the product offerings. They pretty much surrounded, that was what, and I thought I thought I had a reasonable start on that. Mm-hmm. And then Xerox started to get into trouble. And I, very specifically, I took about a dozen companies that I knew Allaire admired, and I did my own little analysis of their financial histories and their migrations and transitions. And I went and showed him how they were transitioning their channels of distribution, their business models, their margin issues, and said, this is what I think Xerox has to do. And he normally paid a lot of attention to me. In this particular case, he was getting ready to introduce some new products. He was very excited about it. And he didn't think it was a timely kind of thing to do. Now, since then, that the company's been shrinking. Their revenue from the installed base, the new machine installs were dropping, and Xerox has an interesting business model in some respects. About 85% of their revenue about on day one and January 1st, because it's an installed base revenue stream. It comes in through services and consumables.
Okay.
So you got about 15%. And you probably can't do much with the consumables. That's driven by customer usage.
Right.
And everybody's saying paper was dropping. Fortunately, not too much. And so you've got to do really well with that 15% to show any kind of sizable growth, right? Mm-hmm. Relatedly, when I came out of digital, I learned you didn't worry about cost. You worried about functionality and features and getting to the market fast enough before the next guy, right? I didn't worry about cost reduction of a product. Mm-hmm. When I walked into Xerox, and I thought about market share, market's growing 25, 30%, 40% a year, whatever the hell it was, something like that, right? And you walk into Xerox and they're talking about markets growing 5%, 3%. Well, I don't know how the hell to measure markets that well, right? So that was an eye-opener. And then cost was what you focused on. So the place was strange to me. Well, never been here.
Yeah, right.
I'm not used to this. So I had to learn, some of that stuff. But Xerox was getting squeezed at new installs. Squeezed on the margin side and not chasing it aggressively enough with the business model in the company. Somebody would write these business plans and they say, well, now supposing new sales drop 8% a year on the installed stuff. And I said, well, supposing it drops 15% a year, what are you going to do? And I would ask these embarrassing questions. They didn't have good answers to that. So I was at loggerheads at times. I don't know why I was born that way, but I was sort of at loggerheads. They weren't doing an aggressive enough job of managing those changes. Okay, so Xerox has been a sick puppy for a fair period of time. Xerox was going like hell. It was originally created and driven by technical management.
Right.
And then Xerox became managed by financial managers. I think some ex-Ford financial guys came over and were running it. Not really in tune with the technology and very much driven by the marketing reports and so forth that came in. And they were when the so-called net ads went negative, when the machine count out in the field turned down on them once, they didn't know what to do with it. And it was a monopoly for a period of time, virtual monopoly.
Wow.
A real monopoly for a while and a virtual monopoly for a while. And managing that is a different story than managing in a competitive environment. So they got involved with an antitrust issue that they lost, which had to do with bundling service and product sales. So they became under fire for that. They were forced to divest patents. They divested them on a worldwide basis, and they ended up getting a lot of competitors. Yeah. And they've never recovered from that. The effort at trying to buy an insurance company and run it, that turned out to be abortive. And they've been struggling.
Okay.
So I got there at probably the best time, given the problem state that they were in. I did my best to try to help with what I could do, and then I retired from there. But Xerox is a difficult company. It had a lot of politics inside. It had a lot of these people who gave great presentations, and they wanted business plans that were aggressive and showed answers that were not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that doesn't do any good
Right.
in the long run.
Right.
No, it doesn't. No.
But it can help your career short time.
Yeah, it's very important to me that continue to be as successful as possible, the company.
Yes.
But
So you leave Xerox with retirement, and do you retire? What do you think? Is it time for another step in the career or time to retire?
I got it. Now I'm retired. I had always had a lot of hobbies. I had a friend of mine who was very successful, I think, in his life, told me once, you got to practice for retirement. By practice, that means, ease up, start to pursue the things that you were curious about or that you might want. And I have stayed very busy learning, continuing to learn other things, practice other things, wide variety, even from fly fishing to astronomy, cosmology, all kinds of things that are interesting to me. Ham radio. And no, I was happy with that. I did for a while. I was on the board of a public German company called Utamako that was involved in basically two things. They did security software for large structures. So you could, management of 100,000 PCs, and the databases and the machines, the remote machines. The guy lost his password, all that kinds of problems you got to deal with in there. And they are also involved in a much quieter business, which they sold, which involved monitoring of large switchgear. NSA kind of stuff. And they got out of that business. I've forgotten who the hell they sold that to. And that was, I was on their board for about 4 years. And I do miss that quotes adult contact, the technical contact. But I also found it a challenge. I'm not what I used to be in terms of being able to understand technology. So I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. I keep very, very busy. And I look back at this thing that we've gone over, and I feel very lucky to have been able to, unbelievably lucky. Who gets a chance to build a business, to work with all these people, to go to a trade show, and you might be the guy shaking the walls of the trade show. That's something.
Amazing, yes.
It is amazing, right? You're part of the history of a whole industry.
Yeah.
Where do you get a chance to do that? What do you tell a kid today about the industries that he might step into to do that? I don't know what the hell you tell him.
Well, what do you so you're got the opportunity to address the freshman engineering class at Case, let's say, where you were. What would you say to the incoming want to be, or think they want to be, an engineer?
I really, really have a hard time with that. But I would tell you, the summer, we said it earlier, the summer job, the breath that you pick up on an ongoing way tends to help you be lucky in terms of your perspective. Luck, big part in it, but you tend to be luckier, I think, when you have 360-degree vision instead of a myopic view of things. And you're constantly learning, constantly absorbing, so that you can sense the external influences that might affect that luck. And I'd say you work in the summers.
So standing over a glass furnace at 2,600 degrees made some difference for you.
It makes some difference.
Yes.
It does. It gives you that perspective. So I would say that's right. I also would say it's easier to swim downstream than upstream. Get involved with an industry that has some growth. You know, a growing company buries a lot of problems.
Right.
Right?
And it offers, there's never enough people to take responsibility for everything that
Right.
needs to be done. So you have opportunities.
You do. It is so that choice is relatively important if you're going to or help build that industry if you can. But those would be important decisions. Now, do I know what that is? I don't. But I tell my grandchildren, don't swim against the stream. Don't get into a company that's stagnated because the politics and the struggles inside dominate, not the struggles outside. You want to deal with the real world, the real market. You want to help customers, and the technology you want to get involved with. I mean, is an important decision. I don't know what those are now. If you've got ideas, let me know.
A number of people think they know after the fact when they want to join Google or Facebook or Amazon, but you know, kind of they're still growing, but it's not the kind of situation which maybe DEC was for you when you joined. Right.
That's right. You know, when did Sergio, is that his name? You know, when will you join Sergio's team at Google?
Yeah.
When did you recognize that it could be what it is?
Or did you ever hear about it to even think about joining it?
That's right. That's right. So I don't know what I think about. I don't have any.
That's hard to. That's where luck gets to be a significant part of it, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
No. Yep. Okay.
Anything else?
No. Thank you for this opportunity.
It's great.
Well, let me ask a
Sure.
couple of
Yeah.
a couple of more general questions. Can you talk to me about when you look back at your career, at least one of the things, there may be more than one, that you feel was your biggest accomplishment, that you feel proudest about?
I really feel at digital, it would be digital, is that I honestly, I'm very careful as a human being to know what I did versus what somebody else did, right? I recognize my own personal limitations, and I never tried very hard, never take any credit for anything else anyone else did. Now, why do I say that? I think I honestly, personally, helped move the company along in its changes and introduced new market opportunities to it. And it was because of personal perseverance and a recognition of what the opportunities were. And yeah, I would say that I know that what I did and what I didn't do and what other people did along the way to help that. And I think I was definitely a factor in helping that along. And I would say I helped build that company, let's put it that way. Not the early years, but I definitely helped contribute to it. And I would say that was the major thing.
That's the thing you feel proudest, sort of best about.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what if you could change one decision you made during your career, what would that be? That you say, I just wish that I had made that decision, a different decision at that point.
That's even tougher. Because there's so many that I made that were bad.
Well, if there are a whole bunch of them, just one or two examples is fine. I'm only asking for one. Doesn't have to be the peak of the mountain. It could be along the mountain range. If there's...
I'll tell you one, maybe a big one. I've never been a good evaluator of myself personally. What do I mean by that? I never realized what a strong position I was in when I was at Digital in terms of other opportunities. I could sit here and rattle through a bunch of job things that came by and so forth. But I think I could have done more from the position that I stood on. I never fully realized what a wonderful position I stood on. I had a certain reputation. I didn't realize that. All I was doing was working for a living. I did what was in front of my nose, and I didn't go looking for the next job, or, not really. And I probably should have done that. I should have aspired to different things.
Okay.
And I didn't do that. So what I tell my grandchildren is don't sell yourself short, especially as a young person. Reach. Go for what you think you might be able to do, and have a good view of your own capabilities, but reach for it. So I think I hung back from opportunities that might have been available.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that was.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
But in bottom line, had a great life.
Good.
Yeah, really, really terrific.
Excellent.
Rich and full.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this helped.
Good.
I've always thought that, but when I write it down, it comes a little bit clearer because I don't spend time dwelling on that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You don't
Yeah.
sit ruminating about your
Right.
past.
No.
None of
Yeah.
us do, I don't think.
Yeah, and since some of our path crossed a lot, some of it's pretty painful.
Yeah, I have another way of saying the moments of joy might have been few and far between. People say they love their work. I think they're lying. They don't call it work for nothing.
Yes.